Committee will come to order. This morning we're here to discuss a number of pieces of legislation related to wildfires and to forestry. These bills represent the priorities of many members on both sides of the aisle, including several members of the committee. And I also want to welcome Senator Bennett to the committee as she joins us this morning to talk about her bill. So, in May of this year, our committee discussed how forests absorb and store carbon emissions, the role that forestry can play in addressing climate change, and how forest management is central to addressing wildfires. Over the subsequent 4 months, we witnessed communities across the West again suffer catastrophic loss of life and property from horrific wildfires. I stand by my Western colleagues and am ready to work with each of them. We must commit to taking the necessary proactive mitigation steps going forward, particularly those that are cost-effective and have a proven track record of success. This perennial issue is worsening every year, and the fire agencies stand to greatly benefit from several of the bills on today's agenda. Now that rain has fallen across much of the West, tamping down this season's wildfires, we must get to work to get ahead of our country's wildfire problems. Specifically, we need enduring, long-term solutions put in place. Our committee has talked at length about how many of our country's forests are unhealthy and in need of restoration, and it's critical that we include forest and wildfires in our conversations about carbon emissions. That is why Ranking Member Barrasso and I, along with Senators King and Marshall, introduced the America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act. Our bill has been praised by dozens of groups, including the Nature Conservancy, the timber industry, a number of national forestry groups, and sportsmen and women groups like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. It authorizes agencies like the Forest Service and the Department of the Interior to accept money from outside organizations that want to invest in wildfire prevention. And all these projects, because they also see the carbon benefits of these projects. Our bill also contains proactive measures related to revegetation, expanding use of wood products, both activities that have been shown to help rural economies. I'm particularly excited about a provision related to revegetation of abandoned mine lands, and I'm very grateful for Chief Johansson to have made the drive here today from West Virginia to speak to us in detail about this initiative. There are 8 other bills on the morning's agenda. While many of these bills are broadly supported, I understand a few are controversial. Senator Daines has 2 bills that address the litigation problem that sometimes hinders important forestry projects. While I support addressing this important issue, I want to be sure it is done first in a way that will procedurally work for the agencies and all the parties involved, and second, in a way that does not have unintended consequences. This morning's topic is unique because the proposals we will be discussing can make a tremendous impact on our nation's climate efforts and address our nation's wildfire problem. I believe we should focus on solutions that both parties can rally behind. With that, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Barrasso for his opening statement.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing. It's good to have Senator Bennett here joining us as well, as he and I have co-sponsored legislation that's on the agenda today. I'm very grateful for you to hold today's hearings. Our forests are really in a state of crisis. And what we're seeing now should be a call for action. Now, those actually aren't my words. Those are the words, a recent quote by Randy Moore, who is the new Chief of the Forest Service. And I agree with him completely. Extreme drought coupled with decades of fire suppression without proper active management has left many of America's forests vulnerable to disaster. Recent catastrophic wildfires have devastated American lives and livelihoods and destroyed our forest and range landscapes. In June, Chairman Manchin and I wrote a letter to the White House saying, quote, proactive management is far better for our forests, our economies, and the safety of our communities than simply being reactive. That's why I'm pleased to see a number of the bills on today's schedule that will move us in the right direction of proactive forest and rangeland management. This includes America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act, which I have introduced along with Chairman Manchin. This important bipartisan bill increases active forest management on a number of fronts. It's going to spur more tree thinning in overcrowded forests that are at high risk of wildfires. These projects give rise to healthier forests that are more resistant to wildfires and disease. Our legislation eradicates harmful invasive grasses that make landscapes more fire-prone. In Wyoming and across the West, invasive grasses like cheatgrass and Medusa head crowd out forage for wildlife and for livestock. This harms our ecosystem and deals a blow to local economies. The bill also directs federal agencies to work with local officials and experts. The goal is to restore vegetation on forested and range landscapes that have been destroyed by wildfires. The bill also includes a number of measures to store carbon through expanded use of wood products. This includes helping to expedite appropriate salvage logging projects in the event that disaster does strike a national forest. America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act enables the use of proactive management tools that make a real change in our public lands and the natural ability to store carbon. Our bill enjoys broad support from a wide range of organizations, including sportsmen's groups, timber companies, conservation organizations, and state and private forestry associations. Today's hearing also includes the Ski Hill Resources for Economic Development, or SHRED Act, and this is a bill which I've introduced along with Senator Bennett, who is here to present an outline of the bill in a few moments. These retained fees will be used on projects to improve recreation management, protect our forests, and support local economies. This bill also has broad support and is co-sponsored by a number of other senators on the committee. I also want to highlight the important forestry bills introduced by Senator Daines and Senator Risch. These bills would address the red tape and litigation traps that stymie projects designed to mitigate wildfires and improve forest health. I support these pieces of legislation and look forward to hearing testimony on all the bills before the committee today. I'm also hopeful that we can work in a bipartisan fashion to address the many issues facing America's forests. Finally, I'd like to introduce to the committee Mr. Bill Crapser, who is here joining us remotely. I'm very pleased that Bill could be part of today's hearings. Bill has served as the Wyoming State Forester since 2003. He knows as well as anyone that collaborative work across private, state, and federal boundaries is key to a healthy forest across Wyoming and the nation. He provides critical expertise and is a valuable resource for the many issues that we are discussing today. Bill has a great excuse for not joining us here in person, because I know he likes to come to testify, because he very recently went on a moose hunt in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest. And as you can see by this picture, and Bill, I don't know if you can see this, this is the moose. And it's quite a successful hunt. So not only are you a great forester, you're also a crack shot. You probably had to wait 15 years to get that tag, because those aren't things you can just go out and. Daines, you're a hunter. Look at this. Have you seen that moose? Very impressive. So, Bill, congratulations again. Thank you for joining us, the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hopefully we can have you come out.
Legal?
It was for him. For you, we're not so sure. But that's something, isn't it? That's impressive.
That's great. Thank you, Senator. We have a great panel assembled this morning. Before we start with the panel, we've been blessed to have the presence of a few of our senators who want to speak on their bills, and we'll go now to our good friend from Colorado, Senator Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for what you said about the West and fires. We're going to spend the money one way or another. We can either spend it $50,000 an acre fighting fires, we can spend it $1,500 an acre treating the forests, and that's what we need to do. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Barrasso, for allowing me to say just a few words about the SHRED Act. The case for the bill is straightforward. Our national forests are fundamental to our economy, and in places like the White River National Forest in Colorado, our ski industries also generate millions of dollars for the Treasury. But those funds don't make it back to the forests where they're needed most. Instead, Washington often shortchanges our forests, leaving them without the budget to hire staff, maintain trailheads, and manage recreation, placing a burden on local governments. The SHRED Act fixes that by keeping a portion of the fees paid by ski areas in the forests where they were generated. This small change would mean more resources across the West in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and elsewhere to help our national forests contend with the surge in visitation and outdoor recreation. That's why the SHRED Act is supported not only by ski areas, but also local governments and regional organizations in my state, including the Colorado Association of Ski Towns and the Northwest Colorado Council of Government. So I am deeply grateful to Ranking Member Barrasso for his leadership and partnership on the measure, and I look forward to working with everyone on the committee to advance this important legislation in a bipartisan way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Dane speaking about his piece of legislation.
Chairman Manchin, this is a great hearing. We're moose hunting and skiing already. I think my kids think I've got a cool job now, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me talk about something that's very important to the West, and specifically Montana. Over 940,000 acres burned during this past wildfire season in Montana. Meanwhile, there is more board feet tied up in litigation than is actually harvested. Let me say it again. There's more board feet of timber tied up in litigation than was actually harvested. When I was growing up in Montana, we had 31 active sawmills. That number has dwindled down to 7, and we are expecting the St. Regis mill to close next month. And oftentimes the reason we're seeing these mills closing is they can't get enough timber into their mills. It's no wonder that we continue to hear calls for a paradigm shift in forest management. And in Montana, that paradigm shift won't occur unless we address obstructionist litigation. So I've introduced 2 bills that do exactly that. First is the Protect Collaboration for Healthy Forest Act, which establishes a pilot program to resolve disputes against collaboratively developed projects through arbitration versus litigation. This bill safeguards public input by ensuring that consensus-driven decisions of the majority are not obstructed by isolated dissenters. This is the same language that passed out of this committee with Chairman Manchin's support in 2018. And in Region 1, we have a litigation rate 2.5 times any other region. And 30% of the environmental impact statements are challenged on average in Region 1. It is time that Congress provide this tool to our partners in the Forest Service. My second bill reverses the Ninth Circuit 2015 Cottonwood decision, which the Obama administration said had, and I quote, the potential to cripple forest management. You know, the Obama administration was correct. We have seen hundreds of projects impacted by lawsuits and the threats of lawsuits, including whole forests in New Mexico being shut down. My bill simply applies the standard across the rest of the country to the Ninth Circuit by codifying the position that was taken by the Obama administration and the 10th Circuit Court. This is the narrowest way to address this issue. Anything less will upend forest planning across the country and hold the Forest Service hostage to never-ending procedural loop for consultation. From backcountry hunters and anglers to the Montana wood products, sportsmen, conservation, timber groups across the spectrum have called upon Congress to address this specific issue. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record a letter of support from 33 members of the American Wildlife Conservation Partnership.
Without objection.
Thank you. 4 Forest Service chiefs spanning 2 administrations have called for a solution, and it's time to act. Forest management is good for our workers, it's good for watersheds, it's good for wildlife, and for wildfire prevention. It's a critical part of our way of life in Montana. It's time to return to some common sense forest management. I look forward to today's discussion and all these important policies. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Senator. Now let me welcome our panel of witnesses. Today we have Deputy Chief Chris French from the Forest Service. We have Mr. Jeff Rupert from the Department of Interior's Office of Wildland Fire. We have Mr. Bill Crasper, the Wyoming State Forester. We have Chief Paul Johansson, Chief of Wildlife Resources at the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources. And finally, we have Mr. Tyson Riggs, Coalition Director for the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition. So, Deputy Chief French, we're going to begin with your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, members of the committee. I'm Chris French, the Deputy Chief of the National Forest System at the USDA Forest Service. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Over the past years, I've had several opportunities to come in front of you and talk about the wildfire crisis facing our national forests and grasslands and the collective challenges we have to address it. When I look at the series of bills in front of you today, I want to say a heartfelt thank you. Thank you for engaging and presenting creative, innovative, and important proposals that are all intended to help the agency and our vast array of tribal, state, community, and private-based partners to overcome what has become our national reality. Forests that are burning at scales and scopes we have not seen before, that are having tragic and unacceptable effects to our communities, our interagency firefighting resources, and the long-term sustainability of our nation's forests. Many of the foundational aspects of our national forests and grasslands, clean water, clean air, sacred sites, suitable forest products and uses, robust wildlife, fish, and plant habitats, pristine wilderness and wild and scenic rivers, and a place for enjoyment for the nearly 168 million visitors we get each year are clearly at risk. Our opportunity to find a new course is now, and the Forest Service is ready to take solutions that address this. From our experience, solutions to address this crisis must recognize the scale of our problem. We need to restore millions of acres of forest, not thousands. We need to protect thousands of communities, not dozens. We must act strategically and at a national scale and leverage and facilitate local collaboration and solutions. We must enable our partners and recognize that fire does not respect land ownership, administrative or management boundaries, or political jurisdictions. That our solutions must rely on science, traditional ecological knowledge, and on-the-ground management and local expertise. Our projects must deliver multiple outcomes based on public input that treat the right acre at the right scale that can finally end this spiraling cost of fire suppression. And finally, we need to keep all solutions and all tools on the table. We need more prescribed fire on the land. We need more mechanical treatments. We need more technological advancements. We need more training, resources, and expertise. And we need thriving tribes, interagency partners, states, communities, and supporting businesses such as our forest products and service industries if we're going to solve this problem. And we need to recognize and honor the toll this work has put on our employees, our community-based first responders, and our citizens that live in our at-risk forest communities. The past years have been mentally and physically exhausting. Today's solutions must fairly pay and bring relief to those trying to manage a system and threat that is currently outstripping our resources. Currently, the Forest Service carries out approximately 3 million acres of fuels reduction treatments. The Department of Interior, states, tribes accomplish an additional 1 million. It's not nearly enough. Our scientists say that we need to treat at least 20 million on federal lands in the next 10 years and 30 million on other lands if we're going to get ahead of this situation. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do to restore our systems post-fire. In addition to impacting individuals, communities, and economies, wildfire damage to the nation's forests has profound impacts on their ability to sequester carbon, protect water resources, produce timber, support recreation, and provide wildlife habitat. The series of bills in front of us, S. 1734, the National Prescribed Fire Act, S. 2404, the Western Wildfire Support Act, S. 2436, the Forest Improvements Through Research and Emergency Stewardship for Healthy Ecosystem Development and Sustainability Act, S. 2650, the Protect Collaboration for Healthy Forest Act, S. 2806, the Wildfire Resilient Communities Act, S. 2561, Amendment to the Forest and Rangeland Renewable Resources Planning Act and FLPMA, and S. 2836, America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act, all take on different aspects of the work to help address this collective challenge. My written testimony provides specific thoughts on each bill, but as a whole, they offer innovative solutions, and we look forward to working with the bill's sponsor to address technical or policy concerns that we have to make them more implementable. Finally, I'd like to address one other bill in front of us. S. 1964 would establish a ski area permit fee retention account and authorize the Forest Service to deposit, retain, and spend these permit fee revenues in certain activities. The bill would increase efficiencies in administering ski area permits and improve our customer service. We support the bill. Thank you for the opportunity to appear for you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Rupert for your opening remarks, sir.
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning to discuss wildland fire management legislation. I believe that the bills being discussed today provide important tools to support meaningful progress towards reducing wildfire risk and protecting people, communities, and resources from the threat of wildfires. Climate change is a proven driver behind the more intense, larger wildfires that we've experienced this year and in recent years. drier and hotter weather and the accumulation of dead and dying vegetation is sparking these larger and more intense wildfires. And as we've all seen, the effects are devastating. This past year, every geographic area in the nation simultaneously experienced large wildfires. Every western state was in extreme drought. And today, over 200 million acres of land across the entire United States continues to be in high or very high wildfire hazard potential. The nation reached preparedness level 4 on June 22nd of this year and elevated to preparedness level 5 on July 14th. At these levels, firefighting resource demand is at or above supply. We remained at these levels for a record 99 days. We are unquestionably in the midst of a wildfire crisis in this country that's driven in part by climate change. The Department of the Interior plays a key role in implementing President Biden's executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, and in the larger federal effort to bolster adaptation, resilience, and mitigation to the impacts of climate change. The President's commitment underscores the work underway at the Department of the Interior, including ongoing efforts to transform the firefighting workforce to permanent professional employees that are available to respond to wildfires year-round and conduct hazardous fuels treatments during periods of lower wildfire activity. This past year, DOI completed over 1.6 million acres of hazardous fuels treatment, which represents a 40% increase in accomplishments over the past 5 years. This is helping to improve resiliency by reducing wildfire risk in priority areas and watershed. Further, assessments being conducted by the EPA in partnership with CDC, DOI, and the USDA Forest Service are helping us to better understand the trade-offs between smoke from wildfires and smoke from prescribed fires and their impacts on air quality and public health. Prescribed fire is long recognized as an important tool to reduce accumulated vegetation that is driving these intense catastrophic wildfires. Yet, despite our long-term commitment to reducing wildfire risk, clearly, we must tackle climate change more broadly and significantly ramp up our treatment efforts beyond current levels. The success of our wildland fire management efforts is largely dependent on cooperative work with our partners. Collaboration with states, local governments, tribal nations, and other federal agencies is critically important to effective wildland fire management. The Wildland Fire Leadership Council continues to provide the forum for partners in the interagency wildland fire management community to discuss strategies that help establish resilient landscapes, support more fire-adapted communities, and promote safe and effective wildfire response. I believe that the bills being considered today can help us achieve these goals by advancing the pace and scale of hazardous fuels management, supporting the interagency operational response to wildfires, collaborating with communities in planning and preparing for wildfires, improving ecosystem health and facilitating landscape restoration, investing in wildland fire research and science, and funding technologies that better detect and report wildfires. Equally important, many of the provisions in these bills directly address the risk associated with climate change, increasing hazardous fuels treatment as provided in S 1734, the National Prescribed Fire Act of 21, and S 2650, the Wildland Fire Resilient Communities Act, would mitigate fire risk and reduce wildfire intensity. This, in turn, would reduce the carbon emissions from wildfires that are contributing driver to climate change. Additionally, S 2836, America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act, would establish broad-scale revegetation and carbon sequestration initiatives. S 2806, the Wildland Fire Emergency Act of 21, would advance interdisciplinary science to better understand human dimensions driving climate change. We must get a handle on our nation's wildland fire crisis and tackle climate change head-on. Neither the status quo nor more of the same are viable wildland fire management options. We need many of the reforms that are envisioned in these bills, and thank you for your leadership and support. This concludes my statement. Happy to answer any questions.
And thank you, sir. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Krapser.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee for holding this hearing. My name is Bill Crapser. I'm the Wyoming State Forester. It's an honor for me to testify before you today on behalf of the state of Wyoming and the National Association of State Foresters. I do apologize for not being there in person. Hopefully, Senator Barrasso's explanation of my absence was sufficient. The National Association of State Foresters represents leaders of forestry agencies in all 50 states, 8 U.S. territories, and the District of Columbia. State foresters deliver technical, financial assistance to private landowners who own over half of the forest in the United States. We also partner with federal land management agencies through cooperative agreements, Good Neighbor Authority, to help manage forest, national forest and BLM lands and conduct wildfire management operations nationwide. First and foremost, I want to express my support for the bipartisan America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act. I'm encouraged by its introduction of the ARCS Act and thankful to Senators Manchin and Barrasso for their continued leadership on forestry issues. We look forward to working with our federal partners to implement this important piece of legislation. Our nation's forest and rangelands faced many serious challenges to their health and viability, including catastrophic wildfire, insects, and disease. The ARCS Act would go a long way to help land managers address these challenges through thoughtful afforestation and reforestation efforts, coordinated wildfire mitigation work, and expanded opportunities for responsible timber salvage. This bill supports working forest and forest landowners by advancing markets for wood products. Not only is the carbon sequestered in harvested wood maintained in these wood products can be used in place of more energy-intensive materials like steel, plastic, and concrete. And when used in substitution of fossil fuels and non-renewable building inputs, the use of wood products can eliminate greenhouse gas emissions at their source. The ARCS Act supports wood innovation and emerging forest-based technologies. I would like to direct the Food and Drug Administration to establish a pilot program to explore how feeding livestock biochar produced from wood waste can reduce agricultural greenhouse emissions. This pilot would expand on a recent Nebraska Forest Service study that found substituting biochar for 1% of a cow's diet can lead to a 10% reduction in methane emissions. The bill would add tree planting and maintenance to Job Corps curriculum and establish a new grant program at the Department of Energy for tree planting activities aimed at reducing residential energy consumption. Urban trees and forests help mitigate the urban heat island effect and reduce cooling costs by providing shade to buildings and street surfaces. Through increased active forest management, we can increase carbon storage by helping improve the resilience of our forest and maximize wood availability for forest products utilization. As you well know, forest products, like forests themselves, act as carbon sinks and have demonstrated to eliminate have demonstrative benefits in many different applications, including building construction and energy generation. Timber harvests transfer carbon from forest ecosystems to wood products like lumber for homes and furniture. Residues from harvested wood can be made into pellets and used as energy sources. With good science-based forest management, forests can remain forest. After a disturbance like a harvest or wildfire, resilient forests are able to regenerate and in doing so, utilize carbon from the atmosphere to grow once again. This brings me to a critical point I want to stress to the committee. Forest markets, both for wood and carbon credits, are critical to maintaining the forest health and sustainability of the forest in the United States. Wood markets in particular enable a carefully planned harvest of trees that is needed for forests to have appropriate stocking levels, balance age classes, species diversity. Managed forests are healthy forests. They're better able to withstand fire and pest and are more capable of sequestering carbon, providing clean air and water, wildlife habitat, recreational opportunities, and countless other benefits. I look forward to answering your questions today, and thank you again for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, sir. Now we're going to have Chief Johansson.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're not on, sir. Try it. Go ahead and talk. Okay. Yep, you're on now. Thank you.
Apologize for that technical
problem.
difficulty there, Senator. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today in support of Senate Bill 2836, America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act of 2021. My name is Paul Johansson, and I serve as Chief of the Wildlife Resources Section for the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources. Senate Bill 2836 provides a comprehensive, science-based approach for improving the management of the nation's forest and rangelands through the establishment of robust revegetation programs and carbon sequestration activities. This morning, I'll be focusing my comments on one important component of Senate Bill 2836, that is Title I, Section 106, Revegetation on Abandoned Minelands. Section 106 creates a pilot program designed to establish native trees, shrubs, and grasses on eligible minelands. The program seeks to establish vegetation that is ecologically appropriate and of benefit to wildlife, has a high capacity to sequester and store carbon, and serves to enhance habitat connectivity. Restoring and revegetating reclaimed and abandoned mine lands will produce significant ecological and economic benefits across the Appalachian region. West Virginia alone has more than 440,000 acres of lands impacted by surface mining for coal. These lands are a legacy from our past. They provide a link to our history and remind us of the role that Appalachia played in meeting the nation's energy needs. These lands also represent a bridge to the future. Senate Bill 2836 will enable us to polish this legacy by restoring biological diversity, enhancing wildlife habitat, providing essential employment training, and putting people back to work across the Appalachian coal fields. Most of these formerly mined lands are overrun with non-native invasive vegetation that provides little, if any, benefit to wildlife. Converting these lands into landscapes supporting native grasses, shrubs, and forests address two critical needs within the region, and those are job creation and ecological restoration. There is a unique symmetry taking place here that involves opportunities for people formerly engaged in coal extraction to transition to work in areas of ecological rehabilitation on these same lands. This habitat restoration work will not only provide environmental benefits, but it will also deliver a sustainable economic boost to local communities. Senate Bill 2836 provides rural Appalachia with hope and a clear path forward. The program affords opportunities for training in the following fields: heavy equipment operation, horticulture, environmental remediation, and natural resource management. These training programs will be designed for recent high school graduates, displaced or retired mine workers, and those seeking to learn a new skill. This transitional training will lay the foundation for building a new, dynamic, and employable workforce. Ecological restoration will focus on the removal and control of non-native and invasive species in an effort to establish native vegetation that provides greater benefits to a wide variety of wildlife, including ruffed grouse, wild turkey, American woodcock, and a whole suite of migratory birds. Opportunities for hunting, wildlife viewing, bird watching, and other forms of wildlife-associated recreation will greatly expand on these restored lands. Abandoned mine lands require active restoration to enhance ecological integrity, restore biological productivity, and create the connectivity necessary for fully functional landscapes across Appalachia. Senate Bill 2836 creates an important opportunity to provide targeted funding to local communities, conservation organizations, state fish and wildlife agencies, and federal natural resource agencies in a coordinated manner designed to restore wildlife habitat and provide opportunities for social and economic growth within the Appalachian region. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir. And now we have Mr. Bertone Riggs.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
You might want to speak into the mic, sir.
Oh, sure. How's this?
Yeah.
I serve as the Coalition Director for the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition. Our coalition is dedicated to advancing place-based collaborative conservation efforts that support ecologically sound land management that benefit and include rural communities. We focus on nonpartisan, practical, durable solutions. Many of our participants are directly engaged with restoration projects, whether that be through convening collaborative planning efforts, carrying out forest thinning, or prescribed burning on the ground. And it's this applied perspective that I bring to share with you today. There's a near consensus among scientists that prescribed burning coupled with mechanical treatments works to reduce the risk of wildfire. While other actions such as home hardening and land use planning are vital tools, prescribed fire is unique in serving to both reduce risk and restore ecological function in forests. We cannot and do not want to stop fire entirely. Prescribed burning works to moderate fire behavior, allowing for lower intensity wildfire that reduces fuels and provides safer conditions for wildland firefighters to operate in. In other words, the way to manage fire is with fire. However, treatments are not keeping pace with what we need. While we've seen recent congressional investments in mechanical thinning, use of prescribed fire by most federal agencies has been flat or declining for the past 2 decades. This is particularly problematic as prescribed burning is needed not only to reduce the initial risk of wildfire, but is also needed to maintain treatments over time. This is not one and done. Absent regular, reoccurring prescribed burning, investments in previous thinning and restoration work may be squandered. Prescribed fire is the essential, necessary, and long neglected ingredient in fuels reduction projects. So what can be done to ramp up prescribed burning to meet the need? First, getting ahead of the risk of wildfire will require sufficient funding. This work rarely pays for itself and will require appropriated funds to meet the scale of need. Funding should be seen as an investment in reduced wildfire suppression costs in the future. Second, we need to grow the prescribed fire workforce. That means increased partnership and workforce development. Waiving matching requirements and streamlining agreement mechanisms and credentialing systems would allow partners to add capacity to prescribed burning, and they are ready to add capacity. Third, we need to support inclusive, collaborative, place-based planning. Agencies rely on collaborative planning to design high-quality, socially accepted projects, but these efforts face an uncertain funding future. We have examples of regional models of federal financial support for collaboration, and these need to be enshrined in statute and funded. Finally, we need to modernize Forest Service business practices, including performance measures and targets that don't prioritize the use of prescribed fire. Timber volume targets and the number of acres treated are not proxies for fire risk reduction work. We need to develop inclusively planned, outcomes-based performance measures. And while this may take time, in the short run, we should prioritize the use of the existing acres mitigated target, which measures the final treatment that effectively mitigates fire risk. And tellingly, accomplishments of this performance measure have failed to meet targets since the measure was introduced in fiscal year 16. Congress can act on some of these needed reforms today. And to highlight a few bills, S. 1734, the National Prescribed Fire Act, would for the first time provide dedicated funding for prescribed fire and would fund workforce training and development, establishing prescribed fire training centers, and improving pathways to employment for former convicts who fought wildfire. S. 2650, the Wildfire Resilient Communities Act, would make significant investments in hazardous fuels reduction projects and fund community planning. It would also permanently reauthorize the successful Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, which centers collaboration. S. 2806, the Wildfire Emergency Act, would provide direct financial support to collaborative planning so vital to developing social license and inclusion of local communities. And finally, supporting the forestry provisions of the reconciliation package and the infrastructure bill will provide the needed transformative levels of funding that is needed in order to get ahead of this problem. There's no future for American forests that does not involve fire, but we can choose to manage fire on our own terms, to reduce future suppression costs, to make forests more resilient, and to protect communities. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, and thank all of you. Now we're going to start our questions. First, I have a question for Chief Paul Johansson. And Chief, again, I want to thank you for making the drive here today from our beautiful state of West Virginia, and to share with us the support for our bill, America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act. I'd like to talk with you more about the Abandoned Mine Lands Initiative because I believe the provision particularly holds an awful lot of a promise for us in our home state. More than 30% of our West Virginians live within one mile. It's hard to believe. 30% live within 1 mile of a mine site. So I know we've included $200 million in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is over in the House right now, which we think is going to be a tremendous opportunity for a great start for us. So if you can tell a little bit more about the types of economic opportunities that you see coming from this revegetation of these abandoned mine lands.
Thank you, Senator. I see the benefits of this particular bill be twofold, and I talked a little bit about the biological impacts, and you know that's really where my training is on the wildlife side of the equation. But the thing that excites me most about this particular bill is the potential economic impact that this would have in rural Appalachia. We would be it would afford the opportunity to put training programs in place that would get either newly graduating high school students or displaced miners back onto those lands, doing some fabulous work in terms of restoring the habitat. So the economic impact would be not only training opportunities, but putting people back to work on the ground, getting idled mine equipment that we could put back onto those reclaimed mine sites to rip the soils up, reduce the compaction, allow us to effectively manage and put in place vegetation. I'm not an economist. I can't tell you what the exact economic impact would be, but I'm familiar enough with West Virginia to know that these rural areas of West Virginia need those opportunities, need those economic opportunities to put people back to work, and I really think this bill has that potential.
Thank you, sir. Also to Deputy French, if the land management plans of several of the national forests in the West are currently being litigated, as you know. I understand this is because they failed to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service about new information that might have implications for their plans. My colleagues, Senator Daines and Tester and Senator Risch, have brought their concerns to me and other members of this committee. It seems like there is something to be done there, but I'm also concerned about the large number of grossly out-of-date land management plans that the Forest Service has. So my question is going to be two-part. First of all, there's 154 land management plans. How many are older than 15 years?
More than half, Senator.
More than half. Okay. Over the last 3 years, you've been appropriated $540 million for land management plans. During that time, how many old plans have you all started to update?
We've had about 35, and I think we have 19 that we're still trying to revise. However, that money that comes into the agency is also used for monitoring and NEPA, as well as land management planning. So there's a broad number of uses for that figure.
So out of 154 that are older than 15 years, correct?
Yeah, on average right now, it takes us around 6 to 8 years to revise a single forest plan.
With the amount of devastation we're having from all the fires and all the weather, climate-related concerns that's just ravishing the West, do you have the manpower, the personnel power, the women power, whatever it takes to increase this as far as this review and making sure we take the necessary action? Everybody, Democrat, Republican, is all for this. So all we need is your all's cooperation. We can maybe make some things happen.
So on land management planning, we have not had the personnel or resources or skill sets to do the land management planning to the level we need. The agency has looked at this really hard in the last few years, has a new implementation model that we're starting to implement this week.
Can you contract any of it out? Have you thought about contracting out?
Yes, good portions of it can be contracted out. We're moving from a forest-by-forest approach to more of a bioregional approach.
Is there anything we can do as senators?
I think the main thing is what we have seen, and this is directly tied to the cost of suppression, is we've seen about a 40% decline in our natural resource professionals across the agency. We just can't pay for those positions anymore. That includes land management planning.
The $540 million, what would you say percentage was used towards land management or other?
If you look at the total amount that is going out to the regions after we're paying for NEPA, costs for projects, monitoring, and other costs that we have as an agency, somewhere between 40 and 50 million.
That's all that was left of the 540?
For land management planning specifically, yes. Because it gets used for multiple things, not just land management planning.
Would it be possible for any of your people who are handling basically the disbursements of the funds, if we can get them in and explain to our committee here, showing us the audit of what kind of effect we've gotten, because it doesn't look like we're ever going to catch up. Even the 40 million, were you all able to contract out before?
Yes.
But you haven't done it.
No, we have.
You have contracted out?
We contract out.
Still cannot increase as far as the efficiencies of it.
Mainly because we've lost staffing on a forest by forest approach. Because this happens every 10 to 15 years, or supposed to happen, we end up having to rehire each time. The funding has not been there for us to do it. And again, Senator, of course we can bring our budget folks up, but that particular BLI, that 540, is multiple things that get funded.
I'm going to finish. I'm going to one last comment. Have you worked with any of the universities in the western states or in the states that are most affected to see if they could help accelerate this?
Yes, we have. We have worked with multiple universities. We've worked with Federal Advisory Committee. We've worked with multiple, we've brought in consultants that hired in to look at workforce planning.
That might have slowed it down a little bit.
And our approach.
Anyway, I'm going to, Senator Barrasso, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. And to all of our witnesses, we're in the middle of 3 roll call votes, so you may see some of us coming and going and coming back. And it's we're very interested in the topic and what you have to say. But if some of us leave, that's the reason for it. Mr. Kraspler, last month, the Wall Street Journal included an article entitled "Forest Thinning Helps Curb Wildfires." And the story discusses how Lake Tahoe and Sequoia National Park survived wildfires thanks to tree thinning projects. So the article goes on to say that many more of these types of projects are needed to avoid or to mitigate catastrophic fires. Can you elaborate on how strategically planned tree thinning projects can increase forest health, can mitigate wildfire risk, and can minimize threats to communities and to firefighters?
Sure, Senator Barrasso. The good forest management does several things for us, and a lot of the basis of forest management has always been to replicate wildfires. When we look at it strategically, whether it's a timber sale, a fuels reduction, or whatever type of management activity or a prescribed fire, we can minimize fire risk by lowering the fuel load, making the forest, the stands, more viable, more healthy, and to just make the whole ecosystem healthier moving forward. Probably one of the best examples of it was in Wyoming, was in 2018 on the Medicine Bow National Forest. We had a fire, the Badger Creek fire, in the interface area. Partnered with the Forest Service. State Forestry had spent a lot of time, effort, and money with the landowners in that area doing fuels projects, thinnings, some fuel breaks in some strategic areas. And when the fire came through, it went around the subdivisions instead of going through the subdivisions. And instead of, I think we lost 2 houses instead of losing 30 or 40 houses. So strategically placed fuels projects definitely have an impact on both forest health and on fire suppression and making both the public and firefighters safer.
Thank you. Mr. French, Wyoming is home of world-class skiing. The resorts in the Jackson area and across the state are critical to our economy. Yet Wyoming ski communities are paying fees that come back to Washington, D.C. This means that those fees don't benefit the forest that they're generated from. This is a missed opportunity, I think, for our forests and local economies. The SHRED Act that Senator Bennett talked about would change this and allow ski fees to be reinvested locally. Forest Service would use these fees to improve infrastructure and visitors services, enhance wildfire and avalanche preparedness, support ski permit and program administration on the forest where the fees are collected. I heard you speak specifically of the support by the Forest Service, this legislation, do you believe that would improve and expand recreational activities that are vital to the local communities?
I do.
Great. Mr. Crapser, the Forest Service has recommended a drastic reduction in timber harvest levels on the Black Hills National Forest. It spans Wyoming and South Dakota. In August, you and the South Dakota State Forester sent a letter to the Forest Service expressing concern over the dense forest conditions on parts of the forest. The letter also stated that active management is needed on these crowded portions. How do you square this with the Forest Service's recommendation to drastically reduce timber harvest sales? And does it appear that better collaboration is needed between the Forest Service and its private and state partners?
I think we can always improve collaboration, Senator. As much as we work and as well as we work with our federal partners and they work with us, collaboration can always be improved. As far as the reduction in timber and our opinion on managing, a lot of that, I believe, looking at the Forest Service's numbers, looking at our numbers, is stand density numbers, diameter numbers, and probably an honest difference of opinion on what's possible on those given acres.
Mr. French, at a budget hearing in June, then Forest Service Chief Vicki Christensen told me that the Black Hills National Forest is, quote, positioned to move forward and, quote, create sustainable forest management harvest levels. She also recognized that the industry is, quote, a critical tool and partner to make that happen. Yet, in spite of this, the Forest Service continues to move ahead with its plan to drastically reduce timber harvest levels on that specific forest. Mr. French, does the Forest Service recognize how damaging its actions here will be to our local economies and to the long-term health of the forest?
Senator, these decisions, especially when our scientists show us data that say that we need to change or manage differently the levels of harvest from our forests in order to meet the laws that we're asked to achieve, can be very dramatic, have very dramatic impacts to communities. I'm a really, and I know our leadership locally recognizes that, and any decision like this that we make, first of all, I have tremendous understanding and empathy to the communities and businesses that depend on us. And our approach to this is to be transparent. We're going to go through a forest plan revision process to look at those issues, bring in partners like the state to look at it, and we are looking for solutions to help those businesses and communities that are affected if we need to move forward with those levels.
Well, as you talk about doing this additional look, will the Forest Service commit to better collaboration with industry as well as state partners in moving forward, and what would that collaboration actually look like? And that's my final question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Senator, yes, we can commit to that. And what I would say is that we will work individually and collectively with those as we go through that revision process. And we'll follow up with you on some specifics of what that looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Henry.
Mr. French, just the other day, I raised the issue of the prescriptive public easements in the Crazy Mountains. And you said to me, and I quote, "We haven't changed our position." But the Forest Service is not defending those easements in the current litigation. Now, this is despite those easements being in the current travel management plan. It's despite the successful court decision in 2007 where a number of those easements were defended. In fact, I want to read to you what the court said in 2007. It said the mere fact that a landowner disputes the presence of a prescriptive easement on his or her property does not mean that the landowner is legally correct. And the plaintiff points to no authority for its apparent proposition that the Forest Service should simply abandon use rights previously acquired by the public. You told me the Forest Service hasn't changed its position, but your lack of action says more than words. I'm going to ask you again, why is the Forest Service not defending the public's access to their public lands?
Thank you, Senator. And I stand by that we haven't changed our position. We will always look to defend those where we can. In this particular case, in the cases that you're speaking of in the crazies, our attorneys in the Department of Justice have looked at the evidence, looked at the standards that we need to meet under Montana state law, and have essentially said that we can't defend these.
So what changed between 2007 and now?
It's a different set of easements that we're looking at, and the specifics on that set are different.
Okay.
That's the way that I've
Well,
told it.
I can guarantee you that if we go to court, the public may win or the public may lose. But if you don't defend in this litigation, it's pretty clear what the outcome is going to be.
I agree, and we want to defend. Our advice from our attorneys is that we can't in this case.
This summer, the Forest Service announced that it would actually no longer allow fire managers to manage wildfires for natural resource benefit, and additionally would be limiting the use of prescribed fire. Now, I understand that resources were stretched thin this summer, but if you look at New Mexico, we had a wet summer, and it was an ideal year to actually allow resource benefit fire to occur, which is some of the cheapest treatment and the most manageable treatment that can occur. So what is the Forest Service's current policy with regards to managing naturally ignited fires for resource benefits? And have you restarted prescribed fires in New Mexico?
We have restarted. Our current policy is anytime that we're going to either do prescribed fire or fire for resource management benefits. Right now, we approve those through the chief's office, and we have been doing that. And then the executive leadership team with the chief today is reviewing the policy as a whole to see if it's time to shift it now that we don't have the demand on resources to address fires throughout the West as we did a month or two ago.
So currently, you are still not allowing naturally ignited fires to burn even where they're manageable and would have a natural resource benefit?
We allow exceptions to that with approval from the chief, and so on a case-by-case, it's just not a blanket, and we're reviewing that actually today to see if that policy will shift based on current fire conditions.
Mr. Burton-Riggs, what are your thoughts on why prescribed fire and naturally ignited natural resource benefit fires are not a bigger part of our toolbox in agencies like Interior and the U.S. Forest Service?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think a lot of this, to my thinking, comes back to the Forest Service business models. You treasure what you measure, and as long as you are measuring things that are not good representations of fire risk reduction, the bureaucracy churns out what it will. So I think you really need to see reform in that area.
So we need to set clear, transparent measures and hold the agencies to account year by year to those measures.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Lee.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Rupert, I'd like to start with you if that's. Council on Environmental Quality encourages federal agencies to develop and use categorical exclusions to protect the environment and reduce the resources and the time spent analyzing proposals. Can you tell me what categorical exclusions the Bureau of Land Management has developed in order to address wildfire or forest management under this administration?
Thank you. I may not be able to do justice specifically to every categorical exclusion that is out there specifically for BLM, but I can tell you that across the department, to include BLM, we do have a number of categorical exclusions that do provide for efficiency around wildland fire management, and that we do use those, we do recognize, and they have been valuable tools.
I was interested to hear in your testimony support for S-1743, the National Prescribed Fire Act of 2021, which directs the secretaries to evaluate previously issued findings of no significant impact, and on the basis of those FONSIs, develop categorical exclusions using the documents as the basis for doing so. It seemed to me that this should be a common sense standard practice. Would you agree with that?
I think, well, specifically to 1734, in broad terms, any opportunity to focus priority on accomplishing more prescribed fire on the ground, we see as a real opportunity. In terms of specific provisions within the bill, I think absolutely, we're very interested in, working with sponsor, working with the committee to make sure that any of the provisions, all of the provisions that are contained in bills are a really good fit, specifically to compliance issues, inefficiencies. There's no, it's clear in Interior, I think, compliance work, whether it's
As to the idea of being drawn from produced following a finding of no significant impact, do you think that's a good idea and ought to be?
I'm not specifically aware of any concern in Interior related to using categorical exclusions that are currently in place. In terms of identifying additional categorical exclusions moving forward, I think from my perspective, it really, is sort of a case-by-case assessment of what the focus is there. What is clearly important is in Interior is, addressing Endangered Species Act, Endangered Species values, Cultural Resource values, Preservation Act values. Those are extremely important in Interior and ensuring that we have a balanced approach moving forward. Say looking at new additional categorical exclusions is going to be something that's very important to the department.
Yeah. Now, is the department supportive of the categorical exclusion promulgated on December 10th of last year, at the end of 2020, under the Trump administration? That's the one that allows in some cases for up to 5,000 acres of dead or dying trees to be salvaged.
So the last thing I want to do is muddy the water on any specifics, and sir, I have not specifically spoken with anyone or been briefed on that specific categorical exclusion and the department's position on it today.
Okay.
So we'd have to get back to you.
Yeah, I'd love it if you could look into that.
Yeah, you bet.
And if you could support it. I think it's a common sense approach, and it's one that ought, you ought to embrace. I don't see a downside to that one. I'd also love to see the department take a stronger position, stronger stance generally on the use of categorical exclusions. But there's a part of me that wonders whether that's really possible, as long as frivolous litigation can so easily be brought, to enjoin critical public work, critical work on public lands. And I put up my own proposal that would require those litigating these actions to have personally suffered some type of direct tangible harm, that they've either suffered that or will suffer it. Does the department have any ideas on how to address that issue?
I would say, again, in general terms, on any specific issue, if there's an opportunity for us to move forward, to address issues, to work collaboratively, whether it's with committee stakeholders on the ground, clearly the department is fully committed to working, looking at innovative solutions and collaborative solutions moving forward, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We're going to take a break right now. We both have to go vote again. Mike, you want to go down? You vote to second, I'll vote to first. Okay. We'll be right back if you take about 10 minutes, okay? If you need to take a break, please do so. Thank you.
Let us resume the hearing. I apologize previously, the fact that we have a number of votes going on, so people are going to be coming and going, but I think Senator Daines, you're next.
Chairman Barrasso, thank you. I'd like to start with a few yes or no questions to set the record straight, to make it clear on my legislation that reverses the Ninth Circuit Cottonwood decision. Mr. French, if my bill were to become law, would the Forest Service still reconsult on plans when appropriate?
We will reconsult on plans, yes.
Does my bill have any impact on your obligation to reconsult on projects?
No.
Given the 10th Circuit ruling and the Supreme Court ruling, isn't it true that my legislation would not have any impact outside of the states that are within the Ninth Circuit?
So there are two rulings at the Supreme Court that essentially made the definition that a forest plan is considered a completed action. And there is the split between the 9th and the 10th. I'd have to consult with my attorneys. I'm not an attorney. My guess is yes, but I'd have to consult with our attorney.
Okay, thank you. Our analysis is it would have any impact outside of the Ninth Circuit states, but we'd like you to confirm that after consultation with your legal counsel. Mr. French, is it only outdated forest plans that are impacted by the Cottonwood decision?
No. When new information comes forward, no matter the date of the plan, that also would be triggered for reconsultation under the Cottonwood, and new information is not well defined.
And that is hence the problem we have right now with litigation tying up some of these timber projects. Mr. French, in reality, do forest plans typically need to be amended or revised as a result of the Cottonwood-related lawsuits and after all the extra paperwork is done?
Of the examples I have, not typically.
And the Obama administration said the Cottonwood case would cripple forest management. Has that been the case?
Not yet. The 2018 appropriations bill essentially created this window, a safe harbor for 5 years to sort through and deal some of this. However, beginning in 2023, I just got briefed on this about a month ago as we're planning and preparing for that. We've probably got around 100 plans that would have to go through reconsultation based on the various triggers. That'll take us years and millions of dollars.
Isn't it true that the BLM is bound by the 2004 Supreme Court decision on SUA that ruled that a BLM plan is a completed federal action?
I believe so.
Mr. Rupert, wouldn't it be the case that there will be no impact on BLM as a result of my bill?
Thank you, sir. So my fear is I'm going to frustrate you here. The department fully recognizes there are issues to address moving forward around Cottonwood. I'm not an attorney, and I'm not also not as deeply steeped in BLM planning regulations. And so, I'm not certain. The department will have to circle back with you, sir.
For Mr. French and Mr. Rupert, you both state in your testimony that you're working on a solution. Isn't it true that the language of the 2018 omnibus significantly handcuffs both agencies from fully resolving this administratively? Start with Mr. Rupert.
I'm not certain, sir.
Mr. French?
I am aware of concerns of the language of how you address it administratively, and that's certainly something we could follow up with you on.
And haven't you had 6 years to fix this administratively?
Well, it's not, the administrative approach to this would be within the regulations that the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA promulgate.
it would be helpful if you could explain why you've got concerns with the position taken verbatim in a Clinton and Obama administration petition of cert. And Mr. Rupert, please elaborate on why you would oppose the 2004 Supreme Court ruling, which your department is currently bound by.
Yes, sir. Again, sir, department fully aware of issues, committed to working forward, and I don't have a good response for your question, sir.
I'd remind you that the four administrations have taken the same position on this issue, that 2 U.S. Forest Service chiefs have as well, that my proposed solution is the most targeted approach in that it just applies standard across the rest of the nation to the Ninth Circuit. In closing, Mr. French, I'd like to switch gears and talk about my legislation to establish a pilot arbitration program. Can you discuss the litigation rate in Montana and how this has impacted agency actions?
Sure. So, litigation across the agency, of course, it occurs everywhere. In Montana, in Region 1, and specifically around veg management decisions that we make, we have the highest rate of litigation. About 1 in 10 of all decisions, including CEs, are litigated in Region 10, and then, as you stated earlier, about 30% of our EAs, EISs. The results of that is that as an agency, the number of people and the cost to deliver on a treatment per acre is higher than other places that don't have that. It often results in long-term, it takes longer to actually do projects on the ground. And sometimes if things are canceled, it can have local economic impacts. I know on one project that was on the Flathead, the case study we did on that, which was about 1,800 acres, we canceled that after litigation, impacted about 130 jobs.
Mr. French, we introduced the Root and Stem Act, which allows an eligible entity to take the lead in project design, development, implementation, so forth. Mr. French, will you commit to working with me to get this bill across the finish line, that Root and Stem Act?
I'm committed to read it and work with your staff. Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Senator Barrasso, and I want to thank the chair of the committee, Chairman Manchin, and you, Senator Barrasso, and also the chairman's staff for being very sympathetic to my coming in and coming out as we're juggling all the obligations, as Senator Barrasso knows, of trying to deal with the Finance Committee issues and reconciliation. So I thank them both. Let me start with the National Prescribed Fire Act of 2021. This is S 1734. This is my bill that would make fire risk reduction a top priority at the Forest Service and the Department of the Interior. On this committee we've had not just Chairman Manchin, but Senator Cantwell, who is recognized as one of the real experts on forestry, was our ranking member as well before she went on to chair the Commerce Committee. And I think, as all of our terrific witnesses understand, these are not your grandfather's fires. They're bigger, they're hotter, they're more powerful. A fire like the bootleg fire in rural Oregon can actually change the weather, and we're going to have to take some fresh approaches. And to just put it in basic, kind of simple English, what the Prescribed Fire Act does is essentially give us the chance to go in and do some of the heavy lifting in the cooler weather, when you can carefully control fire and, in the process, avoid these infernos that we would otherwise have when it's hot and dry in the summer. And in our part of the world, somebody drops a match or something, you have a lightning strike, all of a sudden you got an inferno on your hands. And the reason I feel so strongly about the prescribed fire legislation, and very much appreciate Chairman Manchin working with me as we endeavored to put this bill together, is I've seen the results on the ground. Folks in Central Oregon, sisters specifically, some of your colleagues in the agencies feel that a prescribed fire saved the town of Sisters. Period, full stop. Experts in the field say that a prescribed fire saved the town of Sisters, a wonderful, modest-sized community in rural Oregon. Now, my question is going to be for you, Mr. Bertone. We wrote the legislation, and this is why I appreciated Chairman Manchin being involved, because Chairman Manchin, like myself, always tries to give the states more flexibility. And so we tried, with respect to the Clean Air Act, to give states more flexibility for extending their burn days to increase the number of large-scale controlled burns that could happen during the winter months, and taking this approach that we're not going to say Washington, D.C. has all the answers for communities, thousands of miles away, for example, in rural Oregon. So I'd like you, Mr. Bertone, Riggs, to give me your assessment of how the National Prescribed Fire Act addresses the Clean Air Act issue, which we sought to make sure would give the agencies more flexibility, use existing Clean Air Act authorities to help increase the pace and scale of controlled burns. And I think the specific question I would frame this way: in your view, how does the type of flexibility that Chairman Manchin, Senator Cantwell, and I are trying to promote, how does this type of flexibility ensure better forest management while at the same time ensuring the fundamental integrity of a bedrock environmental law like the Clean Air Act?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So just as there's no future without fire, there's no future without smoke. But it's important to note that prescribed fire doesn't put out the same kind of smoke that a major wildfire does, and it provides much more advanced notice so that communities and smoke-sensitive individuals can take precautionary measures. So I think your bill, it doesn't give a free pass to smoke emissions, but it does recognize the urgency of the issue and the need to begin to ramp this up. The pilot projects that would be somewhat exempt from Clean Air Act, those are still required to have best practices, smoke management practices, and that's a huge and important part of that. And then the bill also funds research that would continue to improve smoke modeling over time. So again, best practices would change and ideally improve so that we could keep smoke to a minimum.
Well, I thank you for the comments. I know my time has expired. We work very closely with the U.S. Forest Service. Chairman Manchin, myself, Senator Cantwell, Senator Feinstein, also a very influential co-sponsor of our bill. We will continue to keep the doors open to work with the service. Our legislation is seeking to use a proven tool, controlled burns, to improve forest health and wildfire resiliency. And if I've said anything that sticks with our witnesses, we can give you examples of how prescribed fires actually save communities in our part of the country, with Sisters being one that folks will just basically volunteer it. When you ask about prescribed fire in rural Oregon, people will mention Sisters. So I appreciate the leadership, Chairman Manchin. We talk about a lot of subjects these days, and I look forward to visiting with you about this one too.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome again to our guest. My first question is going to be for Chief French. We're proud to co-sponsor Senate Bill 2836, America's Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act, and I hope you've got to take a peek at that. What I'm interested in is just your concept of what we might do to help as we try to streamline voluntary carbon credits to be used by the Forest Service. How do you see that working? What are some of the positive things? Any concerns about it?
Well, thank you, Senator. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to look at carbon management across all our nation's forests, and we've been looking hard at it within the national forests. I think that there's some pretty innovative thinking in your proposal. I know that we've got some concerns in terms of how to implement, but let's sit down and talk through that. We're working with a number of partners right now to look at how do you either create carbon claims or carbon credits or other approaches for management across forests in general. So that's something we'd love to sit down and talk some more about.
I hope you also take the time to visit with agriculture. I think there's lots of opportunities for agriculture producers to get those same types of carbon credits. And I'm just concerned we'll be doing it 20 different ways, 20 different methods. How do we measure the carbon? How do we value it? All those types of things. And I would add that basically we're paying for for the service of using carbon as opposed to a commodity. I think we're paying someone to store the carbon as opposed to the carbon's not a commodity. So please keep working with agriculture. A quick question for everybody in the audience or on the panel here. Chief French, is there a labor shortage issue in the forestry department?
There's two issues that we have right now. We are, and specifically in wildfire, we are losing a number of our skilled wildfire specialists to other agencies, states. And I would say as a whole, we do not have enough resources or capacity to address the needs in front of us right now.
Okay, and I probably need a yes or no from the rest of you. Mr. Rupert, do you have a labor shortage issue in your world?
In wildland fire, yes.
Okay. Mr. Crasper, do you have a labor shortage challenge?
Yes, both on the forestry side and the fire side.
Okay. Mr. Johansson, do you have a labor challenge at the West Virginia DNR? Okay. And Mr. Tyson, Mr. Bertone-Riggs, do you have a labor problem?
I would say yes, generally. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any guess on how many of your employees are not vaccinated yet? Anybody want to range a guess? Seeing none, I'll say it'll be 20 to 30%. And my question for each of you, will the vaccine mandate make your labor shortage problem even worse? Mr. Bertone-Riggs.
I couldn't speak for some of the organizations within our group.
In rural America, do you think would impact rural America?
Certainly, you'll probably have some folks that feel hesitant about that.
Okay. Mr. Johansson, will the vaccine mandate impact West Virginia DNR?
Turn your mic on, sir.
Is that better?
That's good.
So, apologize again.
No problem.
Sir, I'm not sure about that answer. I couldn't fathom a yes.
Okay. Mr. Crasper?
As a state, we don't have a vaccine mandate, but I believe the federal mandate will impact our federal partners, which will impact our ability to respond to wildfire.
Mr. Rupert?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. Chief French?
Don't know yet. We're currently assessing those numbers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this important hearing. And appreciate my colleagues bringing this issue up, which we've tried to advocate for, which is changing the time of year when we can do these burns. I think originally people thought, oh, well, let's limit it to this, let's limit it to August or limit it to these particular times of the year, dry and well, I think we learned, 5 or 6 years ago, we couldn't even do prescribed burns very well during that time because they were so explosive. Things just got out of hand. So I'm all supportive of changing and making clear that we have a little more flexibility there. Originally, I think we told the public, well, we're trying to, not have smoke in March. Well, I think people would trade the smoke in March for the voluminous amount of smoke that we're seeing in August and September and even October in some parts of the country. So we have to get that done. I wanted to ask you, Deputy Chief, if we could, talk about what we've been able to get done with the tools that we've been, that we've given you as far as technology, forecasting, and obviously fuel reduction. Yeah. What for this fire year do you think that we were able to accomplish that had a measurable impact, given the decision we made on the last big fire bill?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Senator. I think significant impact. So on the prescribed fire side of things, leveraging much of the technology that we have right now, we're able to much better predict when and how to do those fires in ways that have less impacts to communities and people. I know on our suppression side of things, we're putting teams specifically with each incident management team that are specifically using satellite technology, other technology that we have right now to predict, understand the effects of smoke and where it's going to go. And it's been a game changer for us this year. We're better informing the community. It's better informing tactics that we have and how we do things. So it's been significant.
How has it been a game changer?
I think it provides real-time information and predictive services at the time we're making decisions, and allows you to adjust. And I think that's been super helpful.
Adjust where you're putting resources, adjust.
Individual tactics, but also upfront, where you're going to target communities to talk about the impacts or how you might need to mitigate some of those impacts. It's been functions like that.
Well, we certainly want to continue to enhance. Part of our reconciliation efforts are to create even more accurate weather forecasting information, because we know that that's critical to then you developing maps and areas of potential, the biggest potential threats, which then means you can cache resources there and be better prepared. And obviously, but we definitely want NOAA and weather forecasting to have more supercomputing power so they can analyze storms more correctly and these conditions more correctly. Let me turn to the workforce issue. Well, I would just say on smoke, I know everybody across the nation is concerned about it. There was a story in the Washington Post about it. People were getting the smoke here. Well, in the West, I know my colleague from Nevada can tell you we've already had it. So we want even an international effort with, in our case, British Columbia and other parts, we want these same practices to be done on a large basis, because there's no border that stops the smoke from coming over, and those practices can, just as we're seeing it impacts the whole nation, we see an impact. And so we'd like to see communication between us and Canada on what we can do together effectively. Also, the issue of a diversified workforce. One, we need a workforce. Two, we need it to be more diversified. There's stories about people not having the right PPE equipment, to obviously questions about the culture within the Forest Service. Can you give us an update on what you feel that you've been able to achieve in that area?
It is an absolute focus of ours in both areas, and it has been for years. The leadership of the agency has very specifically focused on how do we change the workplace culture and environment to one that is inclusive, supportive, that allows folks that are experiencing either harassment or adverse activity to be able to come forward and they're supported. And we're seeing real differences with that. It's not universal. There's a lot more where we need to go, but it is an absolute focus of our leadership under Chief Christensen and continues to be under Chief Moore. The focus on diversifying our workforce, and especially in our fire workforce, to increase our gender diversity, continues to be an emphasis. We have a lot more work to do there. But we're only going to be better as an agency if we have an environment that attracts folks and people want to stay.
Yeah, well, I definitely think making sure they have right equipment is very important too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up with you, Chief. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. French, back to the conversation you had with the chairman regarding the budget. Was it the number 540 million? Was that the number you talked about?
So he, specifically the chairman, was referring to one budget line item, I believe, that we receive, that is our land management planning and monitoring line item. Yeah. That funding is used to pay for NEPA resources across the agency, for delivering projects, for monitoring after projects and land management planning monitoring, and for revising and amending land management plans.
And one of the reasons I asked that question is to put this in proper perspective. We really need to have a good, clear understanding of what role, financially and otherwise, that litigation plays in this. Have you got any idea what percent of that winds up being used in the litigation process? What percentage of that number?
I think that the easiest way, I mean, there's a number of factors that you can look at that look at that. The easiest way to look at it is probably the cost per acre it takes us to deliver work in places where we have a lot of litigation versus where we don't. The cost per acre to deliver projects and the length of time that it takes for us to conceptualize and do a project versus when we implement it. Generally, in regions where we have higher litigation, that's generally regions 1, 5, and 6. So that's California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana. It takes us longer to produce projects. They tend to cost more, and it takes longer from inception to placement and costs us more per acre in general. And there's a lot of factors that drive that. One of them is the work that we have to do to ensure that we're defending ourselves from litigation.
And I appreciate that. I think people are stunned when they hear that it takes all those years to crank out a plan for a forest. But I get that, and I think most people do. And a lot of it goes to defensive things that you do so that you'll be able to defend it in court. It can be done quicker than that. When I was governor, we wrote a roadless rule for the 9 million acres in Idaho that were roadless, and we wrote that in less than 6 months. Defended it in front of an environmental judge in Boise, and believe it or not, it was affirmed in the Ninth Circuit. And as you know, we have one of the only 2 roadless rules in the country that's on the books. But we did all of that in relatively short order. The litigation's what took the longest. I was no longer governor by the time we finished up the litigation, but I get that. I understand these things take time, and we, as I think probably you know, we've tried around here to do something about the NEPA process and to try to streamline it and do things better, but so far we've been unsuccessful in that. And until that happens, we're going to continue to get these kind of delays, it would seem to me. First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you to you and Senator Barrasso for holding this hearing. You know, I've been coming to these hearings as long as I've been on this committee, and the fires get worse instead of better. And you know, the rubber meets the road in this committee. We are the overseers of the public lands, and it's important that we continue to make the efforts that are necessary. We continue to try to do a one-size-fits-all in a lot of areas, and we all know that when it comes to fire on public lands, it's very different in different, even within states. For instance, Northern California versus Southern California. Forest thinning and that sort of thing may be very helpful in Northern California. When the brush is burning in Southern California, they don't do much thinning of brush down there, and that's understandable. But in any event, we need to keep this up. It's stunning the amount of that we had. 6.5 million acres of land burned. 6.5 million acres of land burned across the U.S. This year. In Region 1 alone, there were 35,000 acres. That's actually the litigation number that's tied up in litigation, but all of these things contribute to the forest health projects that can be helpful to helping this end. I introduced the Fire Sheds Act with Ranking Member Barrasso and Senators Daines and Crapo to address the fire sheds landscapes that are extremely high risk of catastrophic fire. The bill will allow states to work with federal agencies across boundaries to conduct management projects on these landscapes to protect communities, wildlife, and water quality. Thank you for putting that on the hearing today. These projects would cut through red tape while requiring a collaborative process, ensuring proactive and responsible management. Our forest health issues are dire, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on it. This is an important issue. The smoke that Senator Cantwell referred to, we in Idaho get everybody's smoke. If Washington's on fire, we get it from them. If Oregon's on fire, we get it from them. If California or Nevada is on fire, we get it from them. So we're interested in this, and we're on the front line of that fire that really isn't, or smoke that isn't really our smoke. So we're interested in seeing that things are done right there, too. My time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me say thank you to you and Ranking Member Barrasso for holding this important hearing today. And I really appreciate you including my bill S-24 04, the Western Wildfire Support Act, on the agenda. We've heard it over and over again, and I know Mr. French and Mr. Rupert know this. We have continuing to see devastating fires in the West. It's no longer fire seasons. They're happening all the time, and no one is immune from these fires, including Mr. Chairman, who tried to come out to Nevada when a wildfire was happening and had to be turned back because of the air quality and how bad it was. But we need meaningful, holistic look at how we combat the growing and longer wildfire seasons. And that's why I introduced this bill. Specifically, my bill would direct the Interior Department and the Forest Service to create wildfire plans for federal lands to include pre-fire planning, wildfire response management, and post-fire recovery. It also provides funding to help communities, homeowners, and businesses prepare for wildfires by increasing their defensible space and implement community cleanup efforts. It expedites the placement of wildfire detection equipment, including cameras and sensors, and creates a grant program to help local agencies acquire firefighting equipment, including slip-on tank units and air tankers. And it also provides funding to help communities impacted by wildfires conduct long-term rehabilitation projects and creates a program to reduce the spread of invasive species. So I hope my colleagues will take a look at this bill and join me. Mr. Rupert and Mr. French, you well know, I don't even have to tell you about Dixie, Tamarack, and Caldor fires. You're very familiar with what's happening in the western states with these wildfires back home. And we do need a holistic approach for prevention, for suppression, and for recovery. So my question to both of you is hoping you can comment on what more Congress can be doing to invest in, let's just talk about post-fire rehabilitation, if you would, please. And maybe, Mr. French, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Senator. You know, the scale that we're seeing is nothing I've seen before. I mean, the post-fire effects, I'm used to seeing fires that burn in mosaics. My recent tour of some of the fires in California is just, it's just mile and mile of just moonscape. The post-fire recovery work that we have is tremendous. And so to answer your question directly is, one, you know, recognize it's a growing issue, that there's as much an effect to these landscapes and communities post-fire as there is in preventing fire. Our ability to create more flexible approaches for emergency recovery and long-term recovery that allows us to work collaboratively with states and communities, that's really critical right now. And then the final thing is probably just funding, you know, because, you know, we're losing bridges, we're losing cover, we're watching public watersheds that are drying up, providing water to communities. It's a critical need.
Thank you. Mr. Rupert.
Yeah, thank you. Just to build on Deputy French's response, I think scale and scope. Scale is incredibly important. Landscape scale, watershed scale, that necessitates cross-jurisdictional, multi-jurisdictional collaboration, leveraging, coordination. I feel like in the wildland fire community, you know, we have a very solid foundation built for how we integrate and provide an interagency leveraged response. Increasingly, I feel like in the pre-fire fire risk reduction engagement, we have an increasing sort of framework and integration and collaboration and leveraging. I think, as Chris points out, we need to bring more focus to post-fire. I think we can also think of post-fire as, you know, really the first step to pre-fire, right? We can start to prepare ourselves for the next big fire to come through. I know another aspect of post-fire, certainly in Interior, that we are focused on and trying to bring attention to through a science lens is improving our ability to forecast the post-fire impacts, you know, flooding, flash flooding, erosion, to again prepare ourselves to provide that more effective post-fire response.
Thank you. I know my time is up, and I really appreciate this hearing. One thing I want to put on your radar, and this is what I heard from our firefighters in the state. Maria Cantwell talked a little bit the air quality piece of it. The equipment that is necessary for our fires to keep and breathe safely while they're putting out these fires does not exist with respect to the air quality. And that, I think they're burning hotter. We don't know what the particulate is, how damaging it can be, and my understanding is from our firefighters, the equipment's just not there. Are you seeing the same thing? Or have concerns about the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. The concern exists for sure, and there needs to be attention to that issue for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Chief French, one of the bills before us is S 1734, the National Prescribed Fire Act of 2021. It relates to expanding controlled burns. And so in my state, of course, we have the national grasslands and obviously use the controlled burns. Tell me, do you feel it's important to engage local stakeholders well in advance of any prescribed burns in the Dakota Prairie grasslands? And tell me if you do think it's important, how you're making sure that you do it adequately.
In general, any prescribed fire that we're using, there should be a lot of close coordination and collaboration locally, and we should be communicating that. I don't know the specifics happening on the grasslands, but I can certainly follow up.
Okay. Would you commit to do that and make sure that there is strong coordination with the ranchers out there?
Absolutely.
Also, in the Great American Outdoors Act, it included funding for deferred maintenance on federal lands, including in the national grasslands. And so in North Dakota, in our Dakota grasslands there, it's about $15 million a year for deferred maintenance. That involves a lot of things because you have multi-use out there. You have the ranchers, you have the energy industry, you have tourism, wildlife, hunting, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that we try to do is make sure that deferred maintenance is used in a way that helps everybody. And so I set up, I guess, a task force, if you will, with the grazing associations, our State Department of Agriculture, my office, and with representatives out there of the Forest Service to make sure that money is coordinated. And in fact, the state of North Dakota is providing funding as well to leverage those dollars. Are you, number one, how does that sound to you in terms of a way to coordinate and work with people on the ground? And are you willing to commit to help work with that group to use that deferred maintenance money as well as we possibly can?
Yeah, I mean, we specifically have asked our forest supervisors across the country to be engaging with their counties and with local communities about where the right projects are and how to leverage funds to get that. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and we're coordinating with the counties as well, if I didn't mention the counties as well. And again, trying to leverage state dollars and local funding paired up with the deferred maintenance in the Great American Outdoors Act and use those dollars really well in a way that helps everybody. But it needs a commitment from your level to empower, those folks down at the state level in your agency to work with our folks.
So I will re-emphasize, because we've already given guidance like that, Senator, so I will re-emphasize that is how we're asking folks to look at that, and I will follow up specifically on your issue.
I appreciate that very much. And then regarding the grazing associations, they have some concerns about some of your proposed changes and some of your rangeland directives. And so would you commit to ensure that you give serious consideration to the comments that those grazing associations provide to you and direct your staff to work with those grazing associations collaboratively?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I have a standing invitation from you to go out and meet with some of those associations, and looking forward to when our travel restrictions of COVID change a little bit and we can get out and start doing those things.
It's been very helpful. Anytime I've gotten representatives out we get the various groups together, they get a chance to ask you questions, you get a chance to tell them what you're doing and why. It really it's helpful. I think it's certainly helpful to our folks. I think you'll find it very helpful and worthwhile as well.
I will. And I look forward to when we can do that.
Appreciate it. Director Rupert, I guess, what tools or partnerships does BLM utilize to to manage prescribed burns and so forth out on BLM lands, and make sure that you're working with the locals as well.
Yeah, well, so specifically towards prescribed fire, and I think it is important to note, and this is definitely a consideration for BLM. Not every single acre of land that, is being administered by a land management agency perhaps should be receiving prescribed fire. There are lots of examples of that, I think, particularly through the Great Basin. And so BLM isn't always perhaps sort of focused exclusively on prescribed fire. In those places, though, where we do have that focus and they do have that focus, certainly our federal partners. I'm not sure that there are many examples where anyone in Interior, any of the bureaus, to include BLM, conducts a prescribed fire that we don't have federal partners on, or depending on sort of what part of the country, tribal partners, local partners, NGOs, state partners. It's a collaborative approach in almost every case.
And the same point I want to make as well with you on BLM lands, as I did in regard to our national grasslands. Would you commit to directing your folks at the local and regional level to work as collaboratively as possible with our folks that live and work out in those areas? We've had some of your local and regional people that have been just fantastic, and then others not as good at working with our folks on the ground.
Yeah, I appreciate the point. I'll echo Deputy French's point that, I think we have that emphasis in place in Interior already, but absolutely it's easy to say, yes, we will. I will re-emphasize that, and I think that goes for leadership across Interior.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yep. Thank both of you gentlemen.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Mr. French, I know this hearing is about pending legislation, but we have a pressing matter in Arizona involving the Four Forests Restoration Initiative, or FORFRI. FORFRI is the Forest Service's first large-scale forest stewardship project in the nation, and it's vital to reducing the severity of wildfires in our state, and its success or failure has ramifications for forest management policy across the West. FORFRI would mechanically thin more than 500,000 of acres to return our forests to their natural fire-adapted state. Now, last month, the Forest Service canceled a long-awaited contract solicitation to mechanically thin 30,000 acres per year over a 20-year term. And this cancellation is devastating to Arizona's forest communities that spent years. They spent years helping the Forest Service build the stakeholder support for the contract. We've been waiting on the Forest Service to ramp up FORFRI for a decade now. Secretary Vilsack, when he served under President Obama, traveled to Arizona and participated in the launch of FORFRI. That was in 2011. In June, testifying before this committee, Forest Service Chief Vicki Christensen assured me that an award would be issued in July. She said that in June. This isn't the first time that Arizona has had the rug pulled out from us. Senator McSally, Senator Kyle, Senator Flake, and the late Senator John McCain, each of them were promised by one chief after another that FORFRI was a priority. Mr. French, I know that the Forest Service is discussing next steps with Arizona stakeholders, but we will be holding your agency accountable every step of the way. And Mr. French, my question to you is, one idea being floated is the issuance of a brand new RFP. I'm not convinced that that's realistic. Is the Forest Service confident that industry will come back to the table once again?
Thank you, Senator. I share your concerns, and you should hold us accountable. I grew up in Arizona. My family lives in Arizona. I understand the importance of this project to Arizonans. I also understand the importance of us getting it right. Myself and the chief are personally engaged with leadership as we go forward in the region and what they're doing right now to come up with a solution that will make this successful. We are working really closely with our partners, the governor's office, and we're being transparent about that with our congressional staffs. I am confident from what I see right now is that we're going to have a solution that is better than what was in the RFP in a way that will better serve industry that is already there and attract industry in places where it's been lost. We're looking to be able to announce some of that in November, and I'll leave it there.
Are you hearing anything positive from industry about coming back to the table?
Am I hearing personally? I can't say that I am, Senator, but I am hearing from the folks that are working on this locally that we are being more responsive to their needs.
So we've lost, as you know, we've lost years of lead time to thin these forests. What is the Forest Service doing right now, to strategically prioritize acres in the Forefry footprint when we get this underway?
It is the highest priority for long-term funds that we have as part of our strategic approach to reducing wildland fire risk. And so as we look at the potential appropriations that are coming from Congress, whether through our regular appropriations or the potential of the bipartisan infrastructure deal or the reconciliation bill, we look at those potential funds that are coming through those as a first priority to drive towards Forefry.
Okay, so it sounds like you're tracking the infrastructure bill, which
We
I
are.
think is a very positive thing. And finally, Mr. French, so Senator Sinema and I would like Chief Moore to travel to Arizona and meet with some of the Forefry stakeholders. Can you look into that for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to thank all of you for appearing today. And we'll have until, 6 o'clock tonight for any questions to be submitted for the record. Anybody have anything else you'd like to say before we close out? If not, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Let's protect this great country of ours and all the great outdoors that we have. Wherever my gavel is, the meeting's adjourned. But someone took the gavel. I'll be darned. I've never seen that happen before. It's gone.